Okay, well, let's see what else I wanted to talk about here. Back to Apache memory usage. So we've talked about setting this max request workers, and we've talked about this, I think, 3 times already. But now that you have servers, I can actually demonstrate this to some degree for you. So 2 good tools for checking how much memory are being used right now are top and PS AUX. PS is a list of processes on the server. AUX is a bunch of flags that give you some interesting information about it. So let's start with top. The nice thing about top is it's dynamic. It keeps up to date on what's going on your server. So this, again, depending on your system, this will look different. You can actually run this on a Mac too if you have your local machine and you're curious. A few things to highlight. This is for those of you who are going to be managing these servers. Your sysadmins, if you have Linux people at your university, will already know about this. Load is an indication of how burdened the server is. Low numbers are bad. Low numbers are good, high numbers are bad. So 0.00 means that basically the server is pretty much idle. It's not doing anything. Anything below 1 is relatively safe. Single digits, you're starting to get into issues. If you see double digits, then your system is probably working harder than it should. Let me preface this whole next discussion with the fact that none of this is an exact science. I've seen servers grind to a halt when they get to 12 or 13 for load, and I've seen a server hit, I think it was quadruple digits, and still keep going. Because the way this is calculated isn't entirely based on what causes your server to die. It's based on the number of processes that are running, the amount of CPU usage, the amount of memory usage. So if your numbers are consistently high, then you may want to investigate whether something is running more than it should or whether you need more resources. More interesting to us are memory, right? So this machine has 1.5 gigs of RAM. So it says that this is all in kilobytes. So it's 1.5 million kilobytes, which is 1.5 gigabytes. There's 430 megs free, which is actually quite nice for a system with only a gig and a half used, and then a bunch that's buffered or cached. Again, not an exact science. One thing that's really good here that shows that my system isn't struggling is that none of my swap is used. For those of you who don't know, swap is basically, it's a buffer zone that's created on the hard drive for when your system runs out of memory, because when Linux systems run out of memory, really bad things happen. So to mitigate that, there's an extra 2 gigs of space reserved on the hard drive for when, if the system runs out of memory, it'll start shoving things there so it doesn't actually have to completely stop, so it doesn't have to abandon things. But if you know computer hardware, RAM is hundreds or thousands of times faster than hard drives. So anything that gets thrown onto the hard drive to use that memory is going to run really, really slowly. So as long as this is 0, then it means you've got free memory and your system is probably in okay shape. Below here you see all the different processes that are running. I don't know offhand what the default sort is, but one thing I've got on the slides here is the ability to sort by memory or processor. So by the way, this set of slides is again in the shared folder if you want to look these up afterwards. The one that's the most interest to us is sorting by memory. So if I hit Shift-M for capital M, now it goes from most memory usage to least memory usage. And the number that's the most interesting to us is the reserved column here. So the reserved column is how much is actually being locked up by each of these processes. Virtual is, again, how much they think they're using, but a lot of that is shared or not actual memory space. This is indicative of how much of the actual physical memory is being sucked up by these processes. So this is something we talked about before. Again, this is all in kilobytes. So you'll notice that here I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 Apache processes running. Each of those is using somewhere between 90 megabytes and 120 megabytes of RAM. So this is partly where we got that number of 5 per gig, because these are small right now. I'll show you how I can blow them up in a second. But For each of these ones, again, each of these represents a process running and one page that can be served simultaneously. So 5 people or 5 connections could be made right now, and 5 of these would pick them up at the same time, wouldn't fight with each other, and it would just happen. If more than 6 or 7 showed up, then one of these would have to finish the request it's doing before it moves on to the next request, which again, we looked at the timing log. Sometimes it takes 0.03 seconds, sometimes it takes 0.3 seconds, but it's still enough that students won't be hitting refresh because it wasn't loading fast enough. So these ones, this is sort of typical on a Red Hat style system of where an Apache process starts in terms of size, is 90 or 100 megs. As you use WeBWorK, especially things that are Perl intensive, that do a lot of PG, that do a lot of managing questions, these will grow. So for example, let's see if I can get these. Switch sides here. No. Side by side. So if I log into WeBWorK, as I'm doing requests, I'm looking at problems. Even the act of typesetting a problem and displaying it to a student takes up a decent amount of memory here. So the more we click around, especially when we're doing problems, we might see, or we should see relatively quickly, that these things are growing. So a second ago, the largest one was at 120 megs. Now it's at 130 megs. So, and this goes back to that max request per child, which I think has changed names in the new server. But there was a question that was asked in the install script, and it was set to 100. What that means is that this particular Apache process, the one with number 2965, is going to serve 100 web pages, and then it's going to die off, and a new one's going to start. The new ones, as we said, start at about 90 or 100 megs, but each time this serves particularly WeBWorK questions, it gets bigger. So this is where that whole memory thing comes in. You have to decide, you have to try and figure out how many of these you have room for and how big they're going to get. We'll go to the library browser and show you the real abuse of these things. And that is, when you load a page that has many problems on it, and there are basically 2 places in WeBWorK where this happens. One is the library browser. The other one is when you first open a gateway quiz. I guess the homework sets editor, if you choose to display the problems in the homework sets editor, is another one. But now I'm going to load 30 problems on one page. And you can actually watch that number. You probably saw it just now. If you were watching carefully enough, maybe your screen isn't loading fast enough. I saw this go from 180 megs to 250 megs. So because I loaded 30 problems at once, this particular Apache process just jumped by 70 megabytes. So again, this is where it's not an exact science. The more times people are generating gateway sets and using the library browser to view many problems, the more of these that you're going to get in the 200, 300, I saw one when I was fooling around with this morning, up to 400 and some megabytes. The more people are just clicking around in simple things. Now the key is, right, once one of these processes serves 100 clicks or 100 web pages, it's going to disappear and a new one's going to start that's much smaller. The problem is that because this is me doing this and there aren't any students on here, almost everything I do is going to be big. So when you have this in production, you'll actually get slightly better behavior where if students are just looking around on their WeBWorK problems, things like that, then you won't have to worry about this. But this is where we say you have to fool around with these numbers and try and decide how many processes you can afford to have based on how big they get and things like this. So you'll notice now I'm down to 180 megs free. I'm still not panicking about my server because I haven't had to write anything to disk. Once you start writing things to disk using your swap space, it gets really hard on the server, and that's when you often have to just restart Apache. So if you can get those settings in your Apache configuration right, and again, this is another thing that changes from Apache server to server. And now I can't remember where this is because this isn't my usual server. Conf modules. So on my Red Hat-based CentOS system, CentOS 7, this configuration is done in npm, which is the pre-fork configuration, because as Jeff said earlier, I think it was last week, WeBWorK has to run in pre-fork because each process has to have all of WeBWorK and it's doing separate things. So if you look at your npm.config, and again, in earlier versions of Red Hat, this is in just etc httpd.conf. We set this max request workers to 5 and max connections per child to 100. So if I find that even with 100 requests, these things are blowing up beyond what I'm willing to tolerate, right? I saw 200 and some megs, then I might have to reduce that even lower. It does give you a bit of a performance hit because it takes a little bit of work to start a new Apache process. Now, the trade-off for that is, and I say a little bit of work, again, it might mean a difference of a part of a second on that particular request. So these are all things that you really have to do with your trial and error. I'll show you one more thing on this before I move on, and that is the other way to look at memory usage if you want to, say, save this to a file is ps-aux. So PS tells you all the processes that are running. If I just run it here, it tells me the processes that I've run in this session. If I want everything, then one way to do it, and I can't remember exactly what each of these three things means. A, U, and X are all three different flags that you can add on this. It gives me a lot more information. I think U is user because it tells me for all the users. But this tells me every process that's running on the server, who's running that process, how much memory it's using, and the command that started it. So this looks a lot like top, but the nice thing about this is if you wanted to, you could write this to a file. So for those of you that are familiar with Linux, let's go into my home directory. If I go ps-aux, and then you put a greater than to redirect it to a file, I can call it psresults.txt. What I did when I was first setting up my first WeBWorK server is I set this to run every 5 minutes so I could get an idea of what the load was on the server over time. So again, here, you can look at all these things. The ones I'm interested in are HTTPD. So, there's my Apache processes. There's how much actual memory they're using along the way. You can also do things, for those of you who know Linux, like ps-aux, pipe to grep HTTPD. So now it'll only print the lines that have HTTPD in them. So now I just get the Apache processes. And again, you could redirect that to a file. So again, these are things to discuss with your system administrator, and if you want, you can ask on the forums about help with this afterwards. So again, this is something that you're just going to have to monitor for the first little while with your server and try and get a feel for it. There are already a bunch of forum posts about this. If you're curious, you can tweak it that way, and feel free to ask more about that. A few more things. This is one with me having sometimes a couple, 2,000 or 3,000 students using my WeBWorK server, some of them doing in-class exams. We're really diligent about backups. So a WeBWorK server is relatively easy to replace. Well, some of you had that experience, some of you didn't. For those of you that it went really well, you run the script and WeBWorK is back up and running in an hour or two, right? You run an install script on a brand new server because your server craps out. What's much harder to reproduce is all the students' work. So if you're interested in backing up the students' work, the most important thing to back up is the database. The second most important thing, if you want to reconstruct your courses, is the courses directory. If you have these two things, you should be able to just start a new server, slot these things in, and it will pick up where it left off. I say should. It may be a little more complicated than that, but I have restored from database backups and had success with rebuilding courses this way. In order to do that, your best friend is MySQL dump. So MySQL dump is basically a command that takes a MySQL database or a MariaDB database, dissects it, and just writes a bunch of commands that will rebuild that database from scratch. So, for example, if I run MySQL dump, first of all, just run it. It'll tell you how to run it. At the very least, all you have to do is tell it a database. So I can try this, and it's not going to work. At least it better not work. I can MySQL dump WeBWorK. Well, of course not. I don't have permission. So in order to do this, I need to be someone who can dump the MySQL, the WeBWorK database. So there's two options on how to do this. So I have to tell it what user I want to be. If you're the system administrator, you can do this as the root database user. Now, this is not the system root user. This is the root MySQL or the root MariaDB user. Then you have to remember the password that goes with that. So I type -p saying, ask me for a password. So I happen to know what the password for the MariaDB administrator is. So I type that in, and what I get is it just sends me a set of commands onto the screen that will build the whole database. All this is if you typed all of this into MySQL, it would rebuild your entire WeBWorK database. Now, again, you're not going to cut and paste that. So in Linux, what we do is something I just showed you, is you redirect this to a file. So you say WeBWorK database backup, and then you put a date on it if you'd like, and typically .sql. And again, that's going to ask me for my password. The other option is that you can do this as, you should be able to do this as the WeBWorK write user, which again is the user we set up for WeBWorK. Apparently you can't. Oh yeah, sorry, I just overwrote that file. That's the user we set up so that WeBWorK can talk to the database. But it has enough permissions to read the whole database, therefore it can do this as well. So if you know one or the other of those passwords, you can do this. Now if I look at that file, again, here are all these commands. The other thing is I can now take this to any WeBWorK or any database server, any MySQL or MariaDB server, and I can just pop it in there, and it'll give me exactly my WeBWorK database. And the nice thing is this is a plain text file, so you can save it on a disk. You can read it as I just did from the command line, things like that. You can put it anywhere. So my recommendation is to do this every night. I won't go into the cron because, again, that's another system admin thing, but cron is the system that Linux servers use for scheduling tasks. So you can set it up every night to write in one of these and save it in a file. And then again, if you want, you can use log rotate to actually keep these for a week or a day or a month. The other thing I suggest is don't just save them on the server, because if the server dies, having your backup on the same server doesn't help you. So copy it to another server. The other thing you might want to copy is the courses directory. So again, we know where that is now, off WeBWorK courses. Here's something that I'm going to talk about briefly when I talk about upgrading, which I'm running out of time to do. You can just copy the whole courses directory to somewhere else. Again, if you have 100 courses, it's not going to take half a second like it did there. -R means recursive, handle all the subdirectories. -P means leave the permissions the way they are, which is really good if you ever need to restore this, because then you don't have to fix the permissions after you've done this. So now what I have is I have courses backup. So I have an exact snapshot of my courses directory as of right now. Then I can do things like, again, let's skip this for now, but you can use tar to create an archive of your courses directory. I'll probably make up some notes after this and give you these commands. But if you use tar, then you can create one file that contains your entire courses backup. So zcdf courses backup.tar.gz courses. And this should be relatively fast because my courses directory is small. But now what I've done, again, if you want to see that command, that's what it looks like. I now have this one file that contains all of my courses in one place, which is nice if you want to move this to another server, things like that. Now you can use some of these other tools I suggest, like SCP, which is for secure copy, that is, copy files over SSH, or rsync, which is remote sync with another server, to copy this to somewhere else. So jump to the next slide, which sort of gives you what I tend to do here. Every night, my server does a MySQL dump of the database. So it creates this text file, this .sql file, that is my entire WeBWorK database. It keeps those for 7 days. And then there's another process that runs after this dump that goes to another one of our servers on campus that's used for other stuff, and it dumps a copy of those database files as well as a copy of my courses directory. And in fact, because I have lots of space on that other server, it's dumping all of my WeBWorK directories, the WeBWorK 2 directory, the PG directory, and the courses directory. Now, again, those PG and WeBWorK directories are much easier to reconstruct than the courses directory, because theoretically, the only thing that should be in your WeBWorK directory is some temp files and your config files are the only things that you would have changed other than stuff you can get back from Git. So if you make any configuration changes, it's worth backing those up, but you're not going to be doing that every day, so you may not have to do that regularly. So here's sort of my suggestion for your backup plan. Do a MySQL dump every night. Again, it depends how busy your server is. If you're you only have to back up as frequently as the data you're willing to lose. If you can stand losing a week's worth of data, then you only have to do a dump and a copy once a week. If you want it to be more frequent, then you can do that. We have an entirely complex setup that involves every bit of WeBWorK data being written to 2 servers immediately, but that's a whole other level of complexity to make it happen. This at least gets you last night's state of WeBWorK if you have the MySQL dump and the courses directory. And yeah, again, I will post all this stuff once I collect it. It may not be for a couple of days. I'll give you an idea of some basic backup things. I want to get through my last couple slides here because there's some interesting things, and then we'll see about if anyone wants to stay for questions. Let's start with the easy one, the OPL. So upgrading the OPL is relatively safe. The only thing it will do is it will add new problems, and it will bring in any fixes to problems that are in the library. So the worst thing that happens when you update the OPL is that some of the problems may change because they've been improved. There's a philosophy amongst the OPL editors to never delete a problem from the OPL. On occasion, problems are redirected to other problems, to other superior problems, but a path will never disappear. So if you have a PG file in one of your homework sets, there will still be a PG file there for it to access even if you update the OPL. Again, it may be improved, it may be cleaned up, it may have more randomization, but it will still be there. So when you upgrade the OPL, you shouldn't have to worry about necessarily backing things up. Having said that, this applies to anything you do with Git. Unless you're a developer, it's just easiest not to make changes to any of these files. If you're going to change a library file, an OPL file, and you're not planning to submit it back to the OPL, then the easiest thing to do is put it somewhere in your local folders. So this is all you have to do. go to your Open Problem Library directory, and again, I don't think there are any updates here since I installed this last night. But if I go here, Mike showed you all these git commands. Git pull is an alias for git fetch and then git merge. So it gets all the new changes and it merges them in. It tells me I'm already up to date. But if it didn't, it would say, you know, you've got this many new commits, this many files changed, and you'd have the latest version of the OPL. Once you've got the latest version of the OPL, what you need to run next is your OPL update. So because my system is configured properly, I can just do that anywhere. If you don't have that export command set up right, or if you don't have the scripts directory in your path, then you're going to have to go into WeBWorK, WeBWorK2 bin OPL update and run it there. I'm not going to run it now. You've all sat through this at least once where it counted through those 30,700 problems. But until you run OPL update, any new problems that were brought in with the last Git update that we just did, they won't show up in the library browser. So you need to do that OPL update to make them show up in the library browser. So again, this is pretty safe. When I do an OPL update, I mean, I'm paranoid, so I will still do what I did with my courses directory there, and that is I will make a copy of my libraries directory. Just in case something gets broken, but the library is one of the safest things to update. I'm not actually going to run this now because it's going to copy 30,000 files. So that's the easy one, right? You just run these commands and you've got the latest, greatest version of the library browser, or the OPL. WeBWorK is a bit more involved because two things. One is you're going to be making changes to the database and to your courses possibly. Therefore, you want to back those up in case something horrible goes wrong. The libraries doesn't affect any student data, which is why I'm happy to do it without backing much up. If you're upgrading to a newer version, first thing I do is exactly what I said. Steps 1 and 2 I just showed you, right? Make a copy of your PG directory, make a copy of your WeBWorK2 directory. Most importantly, make a copy of your courses directory. PG and WeBWorK2, you can mostly get back the way they were using the right series of git commands, and Mike was talking about this morning. With the right git checkouts, you can go back to whatever version you were on. Courses, once you've mangled them, they're very hard to get back. So it's worth doing either a tar backup or just a straight copy of your courses directory to somewhere else before you start this, and do a MySQL dump. Because you're going to be, typically when you upgrade to a true new version of WeBWorK, not just a bug fix, you're often going to be making changes to the database. The next thing you should do is jump on GitHub and look at the release notes. So let's do exactly that. Do I have GitHub open? I don't think I do. github.com/openwebwork. And I'll go to WeBWorK2. And so there's a link here to the wiki. I go to the wiki, and then I go to administrators. That's for WeBWorK2. Again, I mean, you can also just search for this on the wiki, but you'll find that especially if there have been changes, in here there will be upgrade instructions. So this is always going to be how you get the newest software. Git pull origin master, assuming you want the current release version. Often when you upgrade to a new version, there's going to be new modules. Right? So here's a list of things that you may not have installed already that you may need for the new version of WeBWorK. So I'm going to do this. It's not going to do much because I already have the latest version of WeBWorK. But where am I? I'm in WeBWorK, so I'm going to go to WeBWorK2. So this is assuming I've made a copy of my WeBWorK2 directory already because I'm paranoid and I'm not convinced that I can switch back with Git. I'm going to do a Git pull, and it'll probably tell me that I'm already up to date. Then I'm going to go, again, if there were a new version, then you'd see a bunch of changes here. There'd be more than a couple commands. Then I'm going to go to the binary directory, and I'm going to run checkmodules.pl. And I'm going to look down the left side of this for any double stars. So I don't see any star here, meaning I've got all of the Perl packages I did. If I did see a double star here, and some of you went through this yesterday, then I'd have to install that package, which again, I can do through either cpan or I can try doing it through the package manager. Once I've got all those new packages, I'm going to go back to my release notes and I'm going to say, okay, well, I need a couple of new LaTeX packages. I can check that now, or I can say, I'll try a hard copy later, and it'll either work or it won't, and then I'll troubleshoot at that point. And local overrides, again, there's some suggestions on how to make changes to local overrides. This is something you're going to have to do when you upgrade to a new version, because localoverrides.conf is not updated. It's your set of local overrides. Localoverrides.conf.dist is. So you might want to look at localoverrides.conf.dist in the new version and see if there's anything there that you should be adding to your localoverrides.conf. So here's the big warning, and this is something that's specific to 2.10. If you upgraded from a previous version to 2.10, you have to run this command. Many versions, this isn't the case, but for this one, because there were some significant database changes, the admin course won't run until you've done this. Typically, on a simple WeBWorK version change, you can log into the admin course and then run upgrade courses from there, and it will fix all these things. But because this was a fundamental change, the admin course can't even start with the old version of the database. So keep in mind that whenever you upgrade WeBWorK, you should also upgrade PG. So I've done all these bin things, I've installed all the right things. Now I'm going to go into PG, and I'm going to do the same thing, git pull, which of course, no changes for me, but there would be changes typically. Now I've updated Git, I've updated PG, I've updated WeBWorK. The libraries you can do independently of the rest. So you don't necessarily, you can do the library update more frequently because it won't affect your actual system, and you don't have to do it at the same time. Since I'm in the process of upgrading, I should probably look at mapjacks as well and see if there are any updates there. And again, there aren't. So once I've done that, again, you want to do this during downtime. So once you've done these things and anything that they suggested, you want to restart your Apache server. You restarted Apache, now you can go back to your web interface. Wrong button. I'll log out. The first thing you should do once you've restarted Apache is go to the admin course, and this is stuff Mike was showing you this morning. Upgrade courses. And it's easy on my server because I have very few. Select all eligible courses. There are no eligible courses because everything's already up to date. But you'd run through this for, I like to do it for all my courses just to make sure that everything works with the new version. So, where did my... There we go. So there's your steps for upgrading. If everything goes smoothly, this is all it should take. Again, find out if there's anything special you have to do, but if there isn't anything special you have to do, then the steps are go to WeBWorK, do a git pull, go to PG, do a git pull, go to mapjacks just because it's a good idea, do a git pull, run checkmodules.pl, install any modules that are missing, so you may have to do some yum install or some cpan install or some apt-get install. Once you've installed all those, once you've seen no double stars on your check modules, then you can restart Apache. Once you've restarted Apache, assuming it starts. If it doesn't, it's probably because you're missing modules. Then you can log into your admin course, do the upgrades. Once you've done those upgrades, then you go through that series of tests that we had on, which session was it? But it's in the session notes for that. I guess I'll quickly just mention WeBWorK scripts. We won't go into these because we could spend another whole session on just using these scripts. But the ones that come with WeBWorK are in WeBWorK 2 bin. You've already used some of these. In particular, we ran OPL update, which, again, indexes all of the OPL files so that they can be searched from the library browser. We've run check modules.pl to see what we need. Jeff mentioned earlier on check latex.tech. This will check if your LaTeX system has all the right LaTeX packages. So if I PDF LaTeX this, it should not spit any errors. Couple of things. What else have we done? We had to use, if you upgraded from 2.9 or a previous version of 2.10, you had to run this guy. Add course is something that if the script didn't do it for you, we had to manually add the admin course. If you are doing a lot of courses, you can actually use this script to bulk add courses. You can run this command from the command line several times. Add admin adds the administrator to a course, things like that. Del course, if you're cleaning up your server, again, same warning with any deleting, this is not recoverable. Once you run del course, that course is gone forever. So make sure you're 100% certain what you're doing or back it up first. Some of these things you may never end up using. The one that I promised I'd mention earlier is remove stale images, which doesn't really apply anymore unless you're using the images mode. If you're using the images mode, then remove stale images will get rid of all of the old images. You have to give it a time frame, anything more than a week old, say, and it will get rid of all those equation images that it built for all the students in your class. This was important in earlier versions of WeBWorK before MathJax because those images would start filling up your hard drive. The last one I'll mention, and then again, sort of leave you guys if you want to explore it on your own, is WWSH. Basically what this does is it gives you a command line interface to a lot of the WeBWorK code. So if you're going to be doing things like sucking in students from another system, like from your registration system, and automatically assigning sets to them, or automatically adding them to courses, WWSH is a good interface for that. The last thing I'll show you, and I don't think I have a link to it on here, is on the wiki. If you go to administrators, and then where are you? Scripts. So there are a few individual scripts here, but there's also a page on contributed admin scripts. So what this does is it links to several things that people at large universities have put together that automate the handling of large number of students. So a lot of this is from Gavin LaRose at the University of Michigan, who uses these to get class lists from CSV files, put them into the right classes, and then assign the sets to them. So you may want to look at these, especially if you're going to be managing hundreds or thousands of students. You can use these as a starting place to automate a lot of these tasks.